"You're fired." The words cut through the pristine silence of the luxury clinic's waiting room like a scalpel. Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she clutched her nurse's badge, but her voice remained steady. "I won't apologize for helping that child." Around her, the VIP patients barely glanced up from their phones, practiced at ignoring anything that might disturb their carefully maintained bubble of privilege. In his Italian suit and designer glasses, Dr. Harrison Maxwell towered over her, his face a mask of cold authority. "This is a private clinic, not a charity." The evening sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across marble floors that cost more than Sarah's yearly salary. The air smelled of expensive perfume and sanitizer, a peculiar mix of luxury and medical sterility. In the corner, a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses lowered his magazine slightly, his attention caught by the unfolding scene. Nobody recognized Leonardo DiCaprio behind his casual disguise, but his eyes narrowed as he watched Dr. Maxwell's practiced cruelty, noting how the other staff averted their gaze. "That boy needed immediate treatment," Sarah's voice carried across the hushed room, stronger now. "His burns couldn't wait for insurance approval." Dr. Maxwell's laugh was soft, dismissive. "And now you've lost your career over some street kid's scars." He turned away, a clear dismissal. But he didn't see how the man in the corner slowly set down his magazine, or how the sunglasses came off, revealing eyes that had portrayed some of cinema's greatest heroes and were about to inspire a real-life story of justice. The tension in the waiting room crystallized like ice, sharp and cold. Sarah's badge clattered against the marble floor as Dr. Maxwell knocked it from her hands, a deliberate show of power. The sound echoed through the space, drawing unwilling attention from the VIP patients who tried so hard to remain disconnected from the scene. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Los Angeles stretched out below them, a sprawling reminder of the vast divide between those who could afford this clinic's services and those who couldn't. Sarah thought about Tommy, the 12-year-old boy whose burns she'd treated yesterday. His eyes wide with pain and fear, his mother's desperate pleas as Dr. Maxwell had ordered them out. The boy's wounds weren't cosmetically significant enough to warrant the clinic's attention, he'd said. But Sarah had seen the way Tommy pulled his sleeves down, trying to hide the angry red marks that covered his arms. She'd stayed late, used supplies she'd logged as damaged, and treated him anyway. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Dr. Maxwell's voice dripped with contempt. "This isn't some public hospital where you can play hero. We have standards here, protocols." He gestured around the waiting room at the hand-carved Italian furniture and the abstract art pieces that cost more than most homes. "Our clients pay for exclusivity, for discretion. They don't need to share space with charity cases." The other nurses huddled by their station, their faces carefully blank. Sarah had worked with them for 5 years, shared countless lunches and celebrations. Now they couldn't even meet her eyes. She understood their fear. Most of them had families to support, mortgages to pay. Standing up meant risking everything, just as she had. In the corner, DiCaprio slowly stood, his movement drawing no attention yet. He'd seen the script play out before, in Hollywood and in life. Power mistaking itself for virtue, money masquerading as morality. The waiting room had become a stage, with Sarah and Dr. Maxwell its unwitting players. Every word echoed off marble and glass, every gesture amplified by the sterile space. The other patients observed with that particular detachment of the very wealthy, as if watching a mildly interesting television show they could turn off at any moment. One woman even lifted her phone, perhaps sensing the potential for a viral moment, but her companion gently pushed it down. "I have standards too," Sarah said, her voice finding new strength. "I became a nurse to help people, not to be a gatekeeper for the privileged." She bent down to pick up her badge, her movements dignified despite the public humiliation. but Dr. Maxwell's foot came down on it first, grinding metal against marble. "Let me make this very clear," he said, each word precise and cutting. "You're not just fired. I'll make sure you never work in any respectable facility in Los Angeles again." That's when Leonardo DiCaprio removed his sunglasses completely, and the room's atmosphere shifted like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. The transformation was subtle at first, a ripple of recognition moving through the waiting room as DiCaprio stood. A woman in Chanel gasped softly, her perfectly manicured hand rising to her throat. A businessman in a bespoke suit straightened in his leather chair. Dr. Maxwell remained oblivious, his attention fixed on Sarah, savoring what he thought was his moment of absolute authority. "You know what the real problem with private health care is?" DiCaprio's voice carried easily, trained by decades in front of cameras. He moved with that casual grace that marked real stars, the kind of presence that needed no announcement. "It makes people forget what medicine is supposed to be about." He stepped forward, and now there was no mistaking who he was, no hiding behind sunglasses and a cap. Dr. Maxwell turned, irritation flickering across his features at the interruption, then froze as recognition hit. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, professional smoothness warring with sudden uncertainty. Sarah stared too, but her surprise was touched with something else, the faintest glimmer of hope. Around them, phones began to emerge, their cameras capturing the moment with silent precision. "Mr. DiCaprio," Dr. Maxwell recovered quickly, his voice sliding into the practiced warmth he reserved for VIP clients. "I apologize you had to witness this unfortunate situation. We can continue your consultation in my private office." He gestured toward a hallway lined with black and white photographs of celebrities, patients who'd trusted the clinic with their images, their secrets. Actually, DiCaprio moved closer to Sarah, his presence like a shield. "I think we need to discuss something more important than my consultation." He smiled, but it wasn't the dazzling grin from red carpets. This was smaller, sharper, the kind of expression that had won him an Oscar playing men who stood against corruption. Like why a nurse is being fired for doing exactly what the Hippocratic Oath demands. The other patients were fully engaged now, privilege and detachment forgotten in the face of unexpected drama. Several phones recorded openly. This was Hollywood, after all, where every moment could become content, every confrontation could go viral. The other nurses had drawn closer too, their fear of involvement warring with their desire to witness what was unfolding. "You don't understand the complexities." Dr. Maxwell's voice had an edge now, his authority challenged in front of an audience he couldn't control. "This is a private facility. We have protocols, responsibilities to our investors." "I understand perfectly," DiCaprio cut him off, and there was steel beneath the quietness of his voice. "I understand that a child was in pain, and this woman," he gestured to Sarah, "chose to help him instead of following protocols that would have left him suffering." He turned slightly, including the whole room in his next words. "You know, I've spent decades playing characters who face moral choices. Heroes, villains, people caught in between. But real heroism? That's what happens when someone risks everything to do what's right." Sarah stood straighter, her initial shock giving way to a quiet dignity. The badge under Dr. Maxwell's foot gleamed in the evening light, a small piece of metal that had come to represent something much larger than employment credentials. Around them, the luxury of the clinic seemed to shift, its marble and glass taking on a different meaning, less a symbol of excellence and more a barrier, a wall between those who needed help and those who could provide it. Dr. Maxwell's face had reddened, the situation slipping further from his control with each passing moment. "This is a private matter," he tried again. But the words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The phones kept recording, their lenses capturing every micro-expression, every shift in power dynamics. In the corner, a teen waiting for a consultation whispered to her mother, "Is this really happening?" "Let me share something with you, Doctor." Maxwell. DiCaprio's voice had taken on the quiet intensity that had captivated audiences worldwide. Last year, I visited burn units across California for a role. Spent time with the patients, the families, the medical staff. You know what I learned? He paused, making sure every eye in the room was on him. I learned that scars aren't just physical. The way we treat people when they're vulnerable, that leaves marks too. The waiting room had transformed into something else entirely. The luxury furniture and expensive art had become mere backdrop to the human drama unfolding. Even the most privileged patients were fully invested now, their own cosmetic concerns forgotten in the face of something more profound. A young woman who'd come in for a consultation wiped tears from her eyes, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. "Every single person in this room," DiCaprio continued, gesturing to the watching crowd, "came here because they believe in the power of healing, in the possibility of transformation. But what kind of transformation are we really talking about?" He bent down and picked up Sarah's badge, the one Dr. Maxwell had ground beneath his heel. The director of photography for his next film couldn't have lit the moment better. The setting sun through the windows casting everything in golden hour perfection. Dr. Maxwell attempted to regain control, his voice straining for authority. "Mr. DiCaprio, while I appreciate your perspective, you're not a medical professional. You don't understand the liability issues, the legal frameworks." "No," DiCaprio's interruption was gentle but immovable. "I'm not a medical professional. I'm just someone who's spent his life telling stories. And right now, I'm watching a story about power and privilege trying to crush basic human decency." He turned to Sarah, holding out her badge. "Tell us about the boy you helped." Sarah's voice was soft but carried clearly in the hushed room. "Tommy, he's 12. Got burned trying to save his little sister when their apartment caught fire. Their insurance wouldn't cover treatment here, but the wounds," she swallowed hard. "They needed expert care, the kind only a place like this can provide." The other nurses had drawn even closer now, their earlier fear of involvement dissolving. One of them, an older woman with gray-streaked hair, stepped forward. "She's right. I saw the burns too. They were severe enough to warrant immediate treatment." Her voice shook, but she stood her ground. "We all knew it was wrong to turn him away. Sarah was just the only one brave enough to do something about it." "You see," DiCaprio addressed the room at large, his voice carrying the weight of conviction that had earned him global acclaim. "This isn't just about one nurse or one child. It's about who we become when we let protocols trump compassion, when we build walls between those who need help and those who can provide it." He turned back to Dr. Maxwell, who stood rigid with barely contained fury. "I came here today planning to discuss some minor cosmetic work for an upcoming role. Instead, I think I'll be discussing something else, like starting a fund for children who need reconstructive surgery. And I'm pretty sure," he glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the other wealthy patients, "I won't be the only one interested in contributing." The impact was immediate and electric. A famous actress in the corner stood up, removing her sunglasses. "Count me in." A tech billionaire waiting for his consultation raised his hand. "I'll match whatever you put in, Leo." The energy in the room had shifted completely, privilege transforming into purpose. Dr. Maxwell's face had gone from red to white. "This is completely inappropriate," he began, but his words were drowned out by more voices joining in, more pledges being made. The very people whose exclusivity he'd tried to protect were now dismantling the barriers he'd built. Sarah stood in the midst of it all, tears streaming down her face, but now they were tears of vindication, of hope restored. The same phones that had been recording the confrontation were now capturing something else, the moment when wealth and status chose to serve humanity rather than separate it. The next morning, Sarah stood in Tommy's hospital room, watching as specialized burn care experts, flown in overnight at DiCaprio's expense, examined his wounds. The boy's mother couldn't stop crying, but now they were tears of relief, of gratitude. The story had exploded across social media overnight, with the clinic's waiting room videos racking up millions of views. Compassion over protocol was trending worldwide. Dr. Maxwell had been placed on administrative leave by the clinic's board of directors, who'd spent the night in emergency meetings as their phones exploded with calls from wealthy clients, not to withdraw their business, but to join the newly established Children's Reconstructive Care Foundation. The same VIP patients who'd witnessed the confrontation had become its first board members, their combined pledges already exceeding $20 million. The clinic's transformation was swift and profound. Under new leadership, it established a dual system, maintaining its high-end cosmetic services while dedicating significant resources to children needing reconstructive care. The other nurses who'd stood frozen in fear now moved with renewed purpose, pride replacing their former hesitation. Sarah's badge, rather than marking her exit, had become a symbol of the change she'd sparked. DiCaprio had done more than just throw his wealth and influence behind the cause. He'd spent hours listening to similar stories from medical staff across the city, his social media becoming a platform for highlighting health care inequality. The same celebrities who'd once sneaked in through the clinic's back door for discreet procedures now proudly posted about their contributions to the foundation, turning their influence toward systematic change. 1 week later, as Tommy was being discharged, his burns healing better than anyone had hoped, Sarah found a note in her locker. It was written on expensive clinic letterhead, but the words were simple. Some roles teach us who we want to be. Some people show us who we should have been all along. Thank you for the lesson, Leo. She folded the note carefully and tucked it away, but she didn't need it to remember. The real reminder was in the faces of the children now filling the clinic's formerly exclusive halls, in the way privilege had transformed into purpose. The marble floors and designer furniture remained, but they no longer served as barriers. Instead, they'd become the foundation for something far more beautiful than mere cosmetic perfection. The realization that true transformation begins not with the surface, but with the heart. The videos of that evening would be viewed millions of times, shared across continents, translated into dozens of languages. But its real viral impact wasn't measured in clicks or likes. It was measured in lives changed, in systems challenged, in humanity restored.